pressing on.
A few weeks ago, we were hit with the tragic news of the loss of one of Ireland's most beloved musicians, Glen Hansard.
I'm pressing on.
And I myself, along with many others, were pure stunned by this.
Well, I'm pressing on to the higher calling of my Lord.
But there was something else that stuck with me here. I was absolutely amazed of the impact that he seemed to have had on people throughout his life. All the quiet stories that had just lived on in the background of people who he had inspired, not just through his music, but through his actions as well. His kindness and his pure human nature. So before we begin, I want to be honest with you all. When I was hit with this news, it was in the middle of a random WhatsApp chat with me and my father, and he told me it. I remember sitting on the couch and I was shocked. I remember feeling shocked, but not really believing it at first, you know. So I then went and looked and I was absolutely just taken aback by it. It was true. I had also then received a few messages from people saying, you know, look, we need a Glen Hansard video. You gotta do it. And so off the back of that, I actually tried to do it, but I actually just couldn't push myself to do it. I didn't feel right. So I left it for a time and I said I would come back to it when I was feeling a little bit better about it. And do you know what? I'm so glad I did. At the same time, I felt that no matter what I wrote down on paper or said, I would never be able to accurately capture or show to you all what he actually meant to the world, what he meant to musicians in Ireland, big or small. Honestly, even still, recording this right now, I know I still can't do that. But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try. I was hit by one interview in particular. An interview that he had when he was discussing his time when he met one of his heroes, Van Morrison. During his main busking years on Grafton Street in Dublin, he had known somebody from the Guinness family there. A lady, anyway, I couldn't remember what her name was, but she was a little bit older than him at the time. She asked for him to come to the Guinness house as Van Morrison was turning 50 years old. They were having a party there for him. So he went, and he stood and he listened from the near back of the room while Van Morrison was playing song after song and asking the audience as well now if they'd have any requests. Do they want to hear any songs? One of these times here, Glen hesitantly shouted up from the back, asking him to play Hungry for Your Love. And after a bit of silence, Van replied, "You don't know me," and, of course, didn't play the song. Glen remarked here that he just absolutely felt crushed by it. He was one of his heroes after all. And from what I gathered here from the interview, he had left the room. But after some time, the lady he knew who invited him in the beginning asked him to come on back in, and after a bit of convincing, Glen went back inside. After some time, Van was asking for more requests here and there, but then eventually asked if anybody wanted to sing something, did they want to play? And this is where the lady nominated Glen to go up and perform. Now this was just after, obviously, the rejection, let's call it, that he had a few moments earlier, mind you. But regardless, Glen was ushered up to the front by the lady and the audience as well, and he started to perform. Now after a while, Glen was, playing a few songs, but eventually I believe Van asked Glen to sing Hungry for Your Love, the song which was, as we know, initially rejected earlier in the evening. As the song went on though, Glen mentioned that Van seemed to be getting more and more into it, and that as he was a huge fan of his, he noticed some of Van's quirks popping up while he was singing. That someone who wasn't familiar with Van's stuff might have looked like things weren't going well, but Glen mentioned that he knew Van was enjoying it. After the performances anyway, and later in the evening, Van invited Glen up into his room for some port and more tunes. He mentioned that while they were there, they barely ever spoke, or there was no small talk rather, just singing back and forth, some of Morrison's tunes, some of Bob Dylan's as well. There was no chat about how did you get into music, or what's your favourite chord progression, or I know that Dadgad is the superior guitar tuning, but I don't want anyone else to know. Those kind of things. It was just the songs, and Glen said that he was just in awe at watching Morrison playing. The rhythms that he was using as well was just something else altogether. That he himself learned so much by just watching, despite not even talking about the technical aspects of the music. In the end though, somebody came up to see what was going on, where the birthday man Morrison was. The last thing he said to Glen was, "Nice voice, good songs, blah blah blah." And that was it. So rewind a little bit here. Glen had said that he was crushed when he suggested Hungry for Your Love in the first place, and with a bit of help in convincing from the lady who invited him, he bounced right back. If he had given in to the rejection, right, in the first place, he never would have actually gotten to sit there with one of his musical heroes and sing those songs together. He mentioned here that the act of somebody else helping him overcome an obstacle like the anxiety and the fear he must have felt defined him or gave him a principle to live by over the years to come. And that there is something that really hit me, right? I'm an awful one for turning away at the first hit of an obstacle like that. No matter what video I can put together, it just will never do it justice. And you know what? I'm actually okay with that. I didn't know Glen personally, but a lot of musicians that I know did know him personally, and he had helped them in ways that I had never known before. Glen mentioned that everything he created and everything he did had to be about the people. And not only for musicians, he was passionate about helping the homeless, which, as we know, for Ireland specifically, and my guess is that it might be a similar trend around the world. And as we know, coming into the winter months, it only gets more rough. So I want to take this video right now and say that whatever profits this video makes over the next month, from the day that it was published, I will donate 50% of it to the Dublin Simon community. And as YouTube videos and their performances can just fluctuate massively, right? There's no guarantee that this video will perform well. And it's also hard to predict how long a video will perform for if it does. I might very well end up just donating €20, honestly. But if that's the case, I will do it. But you're in control. So if you can like the video and share it, as I always say, you have so much control over the reach of the video, and it all starts with that like button.
What was lost has now been found. What's to come has already been. Well, I'm pressing on. Yeah, I'm pressing on.
The story of Glen and Van Morrison was something else for me. At a very high level, it gave me an understanding of what kind of person Glen Hansard was. And as I mentioned briefly how after his tragic passing that he had inspired musicians all around Ireland and even abroad. The best example anyway, in my opinion, to show Glen's philosophy of it should always be about the people is David Keenan. He's a brilliant musician and songwriter from Dundalk, and my Facebook algorithm did a good job for once, and it showed me a post that David made that was honestly the first real example that made me realise, as somebody who didn't know Glen personally, this man was more than just a great musician. He was a great human being. Back in 2016, I think, I'm not exactly sure when, Glen was gigging in Dundalk, and later in the evening he had called David up on stage to perform with him. In a way, just as Van Morrison did for Glen all those years before. After that, around 2018, they had went to America together, and Glen had gifted a guitar to David, which he said he has written every single song on since then. There was absolutely no requirement for Glen to do any of this. He just did it. It was always all about the people. As David said, no one did more to pull up others onto the ship and give them a shot. Van Morrison was 50 years old in 1995, and Glen Hansard performed with David on stage in Dundalk some 20 years later. His core philosophy has stayed true to him for over 2 decades at that point. And I'm really only giving you one example of his humanity here. There are countless others. Zoe Hader is another musician whose story I crossed, and is just another perfect example of the type of person Glen was. Glen had taught her first chords, bought her first guitar, taught her what music meant. All in all, just passed on his philosophy of life, music and songwriting to her. Again, there was absolutely no requirement for him to do any of these things. He just did it. It's very hard to explain this, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Without people like Glen to make a lifelong impression on people, would we ever truly be creative? Would we ever truly have aspirations in life? I feel that we as humans are naturally impressionable, and I fully believe as well that creativity doesn't come from out of thin air. There always has to be a spark, if you know what I mean. And from my really high level knowledge of Glen Hansard, Falling Slowly, The Frames, the movie Once, his busking project, just honestly my basic understanding of what he has created and what he's done. Because of that spark, like I said earlier on, he in a way inspired me to kind of stop shying away from rejection or stop overthinking things. Yes, I'm a musician, but I'm not a very good one like David or Zoe. But you don't have to take musical inspiration alone from a musician, especially one who was very outspoken on their beliefs like Glen. He was passionate about everything that he did, and especially he was passionate about the people he lived alongside. When we talk about his work for the homeless in Ireland, he not only regularly visited hostels or streets to play requests to the people there, or just to even spend time with them and listen to the stories of the people experiencing homelessness. He also participated in awareness actions outside government buildings like the Home for Homeless campaign. But most famously in 2010, a tradition that still continues today was started in Grafton Street in Dublin, the Christmas Eve busk. Musicians like Bono, Damien Rice, Sinead O'Connor all joined him to raise funds and boost public awareness by playing music and singing songs right there on the street. In another interview I stumbled across, which was just a casual chat in the cold of New York, he mentioned a few things that were the inspiration for this Christmas Eve busk. As we know, he was a busker from the very beginning, and he mentioned that if you spend enough time on a street corner in any city of the world, you really get to know that city. The entire micro-community of the city reveals itself to you. Once the busk project was set up, he had an absolutely massive turnout, and the logistics of it proved to be tricky, to the point where 5,000 people were basically on a street and there was absolutely no room for people to move by, so they moved them into the park. But he said here that that basically defeated the whole point of having the event on the street. Sadly, from what I could read anyway as of today, it's a bit uncertain whether the event is going to continue at the end of this year and onwards. This just kind of shows here how much of a key figure Glen was in organising it himself. My gut though tells me it will continue this year. I have a feeling that people will move mountains to make it so, especially this year. I feel it's more important now than ever to kind of keep this going. But how did it all come to this? Glen was an absolutely huge part of the music scene in Ireland, well before the movie Once was made. He was doing all of this before the fame, you could say. One example of this is one of my favourite musicians who sadly passed away in 2001, Mick Christopher. He was a busking buddy of Glen's there on Dublin's Grafton Street. And if you don't know Mick Christopher, you more than likely know that Guinness ad with Michael Fassbender in it. The song there is Hey Day. I remember as well, every time that song came on the radio, I legged it as fast as I could to go and turn the volume up. One time my brother unplugged the radio as a joke, and I think the anger that followed had something to do with why my memory is so blurry. But all I could remember was a cheeky giggle and then a load of running. Honestly though, those days were great, weren't they? When your favourite song just came on the radio and you just dropped whatever you were doing because you had absolutely no idea when it's going to come on next. But anyway, I do recommend having a listen to the album Skylarkin. This album, which after Mick Christopher passed away at the age of 32, Glen helped finish the album so Mick's music would never be forgotten. Again, this is just another example of the humanity of Glen Hansard. But I think the movie Once and the absolutely beautiful song that was created within it, Falling Slowly, the one that we all know, it's just an absolute masterpiece. It was written by Glen himself and Markéta Irglova. And how the movie actually came to be is just brilliant. They had a fair bit of budget to work with before the movie was made, and actually Cillian Murphy was supposed to play the role of Guy, not Glen Hansard, who honestly, this is just one of those cases where I absolutely cannot imagine anyone else in a role in a movie. Like, I'm trying to picture Cillian Murphy instead of Glen, but I literally just can't. Cillian had ultimately backed out of the movie for a number of reasons. Though he had a musical background himself, he felt that he just couldn't match up with Glen's vocals. Also, I believe as well that he didn't feel comfortable working alongside Markéta, who didn't really have any acting experience at the time, she admitted. In the end, Cillian pursued a different project. At that time here too, this slashed the budget for the movie all the way down to €100,000 thereabouts. But they didn't quit. In a few interviews, Glen mentioned that the recording of the movie was done with, hand cameras, not your usual big movie production equipment. Basically the modern day example of making amateur videos for YouTube versus Netflix. But anyway, to replace Cillian Murphy, Glen Hansard took the spot. The director John Carney convinced Glen to take his spot, as he wanted a real musician to take the role. He himself had a bit of acting experience now as well in The Commitments, which, again, if you haven't seen it, please do go watch it. But anyway, Glen took the role as Guy, and honestly, I'm genuinely thankful it turned out that way. I can't actually imagine anyone else in that role, like I said, and I feel the budget that they were given, the budget they had to work with, made the film more real. Like, instead of the big budgets and overproduction, you just have this real, authentic story and recording. I remember watching it a long time ago, and I'm in no ways a movie critic, but I just felt like I was watching a real story unfold. It's funny, isn't it, how you can just throw a load of money at it to make it better, but that doesn't necessarily make it feel more authentic. In the end though, the movie was a hit, and the song even more so. It won an Oscar for the best original song in 2008, and the budget, remember, it was cut to 100 grand. the movie grossed $23 million, which is absolutely huge, and it doesn't happen very often. It clearly shows just how much the story and the song really resonated with the viewers. But the song and the fame that came with it acted as a catalyst for everything that Glen was aiming to achieve. He was well aware, and had mentioned it in so many interviews, that he was very conscious of becoming, for lack of a better word, commercialized and swaying too far from his core principle that we mentioned earlier in the video. It's always about the people. And for what we know of him and some examples I shared with you, absolutely didn't sway who he was as a person. Even up until a few years ago in 2023, when Shane MacGowan passed away. When Victoria Mary Clark, Shane's wife, asked Glen to play a song, he offered not only to play a song, but to organise the entire tribute so she didn't have to worry. And as we know, that send-off for Shane was beautifully done. In a way, when we look at the funeral of Glen Hansard as well, and the events around it, the speeches, the performances, it was a perfect way of everybody who knew him saying, "We know how much you gave to us, Glen, so let us repay the favour." The most amazing thing for myself here really is, like I said, I didn't know Glen personally, only through other musicians, friends, acquaintances and the likes of that. But how a person who was not directly involved in my life can have an impact on it through his actions and his music. I'm sure this is the case with so many of you as well, and I'm sure you have more stories that honestly should have been told within this video. But please do share them all down in the comments so it can always be remembered and shared amongst all the viewers. I have 100%, absolutely, definitely, more than likely, left something out, but I've convinced myself that's okay. As I said, I was absolutely terrified of even doing this video because I felt like I could just never make anything that accurately captures all his achievements. But I really hope it did show you the human side of him, that he was more than just a musician or an actor here, that he has inspired countless musicians to follow in his footsteps, not just musically, but to also reach out and help others when they really, really need it. He will be greatly missed, but he'll never be forgotten, as they say. Far from it. If you take anything away from this video here, take away this from his philosophy, that music is about human connection, community, and bringing people together.